The rain that evening wasn't the kind that simply fell and was forgotten. It clung, like a second skin, soaking through the streets of New York, running down glass towers until the neon fractured into trembling puddles. It carried the heavy scent of gasoline, wet concrete, and something charred from a food cart that had burned too long. The city hummed with restless traffic, but on a narrow side street, under a sputtering lamp, life moved slower, muffled by the steady patter of water. Jake Turner sat hunched on a weathered bench, cap brim low though it did little to shield his face. The rain traced lines down his jaw, catching briefly on the faint scar that cut across it, a reminder of a knife fight 5 years ago in an alley that still haunted his sleep. 36 years old, built broad and solid from long years on patrol, Jake usually carried the kind of presence that made neighbors wave, that calmed parents, that earned children's trust. But tonight, his eyes were shadowed, the lines at their corners deeper, etched not by age but by failure. The boy had been right there. Jake could still see his terrified eyes, wrists bound, lips trembling around a gag, before the unmarked van peeled away, swallowed by a labyrinth of traffic. He had given chase, rain soaking his uniform, lungs burning, but the city had closed in around him, indifferent. Failure was nothing new to a cop, but this one carved deep, heavier than his badge could bear. He didn't want to go home, not with the memory replaying on loop in his head. So he sat in the rain, letting the cold sink into his bones, as though punishment might dull the ache. That was when he noticed movement. At first, just a flicker. A shadow that didn't fit the rhythm of pedestrians trudging by. Low to the ground, weaving between trash cans, slipping from puddle to puddle, it emerged slowly, hesitating at the edge of light. Jake squinted, breath-catching. A German shepherd, but not the kind from glossy calendars or polished patrol units. This one bore the weary weight of the streets. His fur, once rich with tan and sable, hung heavy with water, clumped and streaked with mud. His ribs pressed against skin too thin, and his right hind leg carried a limp that spoke of pain ignored. A jagged notch cut into his ear, the kind left by fights long past. But it was the eyes that stopped Jake. Amber, sharp, and unyielding. They were alive, too alive for a stray the city had forgotten. And in his mouth, clenched carefully, he carried half of a soggy bagel, uneven and torn, like something scavenged from the back of a deli dumpster. Step by step, the shepherd approached the bench, dropped the bagel at Jake's boots, then stepped back, tail flicking once, tentative, as if waiting for judgment. Jake stared. His lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile breaking the stone mask of his face. His voice was rough, gravelly from hours of silence. "You bringing me dinner?" The world didn't pause for the exchange. A pretzel vendor wheeled past, muttering with a shake of his head. "That must's been hanging around here for months." He didn't slow down, the cart's squeaky wheels vanishing into the night. A woman in a red coat skirted wide, her eyes narrowing with distaste as she hurried past the dripping dog, heels clicking against wet pavement. But the shepherd didn't flinch, didn't move from his place. Jake lowered his hand, palm open. The dog sniffed, hesitated, then pressed his cold, wet nose against it with a trust that felt both fragile and unearned. Up close, Jake saw more than hunger. He saw exhaustion. He saw scars the city hadn't been kind enough to remember. And still, beneath the wreckage of his body, there was a steadiness, the kind of presence that said he'd endured worse and chosen survival anyway. "What's your story, huh?" Jake murmured, scanning for a collar, for a tag, for anything that might tie this animal to someone, somewhere. Nothing. Just matted fur, the faint smell of earth and rain, and those eyes that didn't look away. The shepherd sat down beside him without being told, pressing lightly against his leg, claiming space as though it had always been his. The rain didn't let up. It tapped against Jake's cap, slid down the brim, dripped from his chin. He didn't move away. Minutes passed, drawn out, filled only with the hush of the storm and the strange comfort of presence. Jake listened to the distant hiss of passing tires, the fading squeal of the pretzel cart, the muted chorus of the city beyond. But here, under the sickly light of the lamp, there was only his own breath and the steady, quiet heartbeat of the dog beside him. Two souls adrift in a city that didn't stop for anyone, sharing a silence that felt heavier, yet somehow lighter than the rain. "All right, buddy?" Jake finally muttered, leaning forward, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "You look like you could use a roof. And maybe, so could I." The shepherd tilted his head, amber eyes steady, as if weighing the offer. Then, with quiet certainty, he pushed his nose against Jake's knee. It wasn't a bark, wasn't a whine, just a choice. Jake rose from the bench, boots splashing through shallow curb water, and together they started down the side street toward the precinct. The rain had softened into mist now, thin enough to blur street lamps into hazy halos, neon signs bleeding into watercolor streaks across the wet pavement. Ranger trotted ahead, paws soundless against the slick concrete, but every so often he glanced back to make sure Jake was still there. In the mist, Jake studied him more closely. This wasn't just a street stray. The way the muscles shifted beneath his wet coat was too precise, too measured, the kind of movement that came from training. His tail didn't wag, but it didn't sag either, low, steady, deliberate, as though every step had a purpose. That was when Jake noticed it. The pale scar, a tight ring around the dog's neck, like something had once bound him far too long. As they crossed to the next block, the skyline opened up, revealing the dark silhouette of Dawson Corporate Tower. 30 stories of glass and steel, its reflective windows black except for a handful of glowing floors. Jake's pace slowed when Ranger froze completely. The shepherd's ears shot forward, eyes locked on the building, every nerve in his body alive with tension. Then came the sound, low and guttural, almost inaudible over the rain. A growl, quiet, warning, unsettled. Jake followed his gaze, frowning at the tower. He knew it. The precinct had been called there before, for break-ins, disputes, nothing serious. Still, something about the dog's focus sank a hook into Jake's instincts. "What's your problem with that place, huh?" he muttered. Ranger didn't move, lips barely parted over sharp teeth, gaze fixed on the steel monolith as if it held a secret only he understood. A cough from the shadows broke the moment. Jake turned sharply. A man sat on a low stone wall at the entrance to an alley, hunched inside a tattered army jacket that had lost its color years ago. His beard was thick and gray, his skin creased and weather-beaten. A knitted cap shadowed watery blue eyes that carried the weight of years lived too hard. "You with that dog?" the man rasped, chin jerking toward Ranger. His voice had the scratch of long-term cigarettes. Jake stepped closer. "You know him?" The man's nod was slow, deliberate. "Seen him round for months. Don't belong to no one, but he ain't no regular stray. Hangs around here, circles the block. Doesn't beg." Jake's gut tightened. "Always around this building?" "Yeah," the man said, scratching at his beard. "Mostly after dark. Sometimes disappears a day or two, then comes back. Saw him once trying to squeeze through the loading dock gate, barking like he'd seen the devil himself." He gave the shepherd a sideways glance. "Smart one, too. Won't let anyone close. You must be something special if he's sticking with you." Jake crouched, eyes level with the dog. "You've been hanging around here for a reason, haven't you?" Ranger's stare was steady, unreadable, but it carried weight. Not instinct, intention. The man shifted in his jacket. "Name's Walter Briggs. Used to work maintenance before the company folded. Bad back, bad luck, and here I am." His words weren't heavy with pity, just a blunt fact spoken into the damp night. Jake respected that. He pulled a few bills from his pocket, pressing them into Walter's rough hand. "Get yourself something warm, and if you see this dog near that building again, call me." He scribbled his cell on a scrap of paper from his notepad. Walter squinted at it, then nodded. "Will do, officer." "Turner. Jake Turner," he said. "Turner," Walter repeated, almost testing the name. His eyes flicked to the dog. "You keep that one close. Dogs like him, they know things." Jake offered a short salute and stepped away as Ranger finally broke his vigil and followed. Yet as they passed Dawson Tower, Jake noticed the shepherd's head tilt, ears flicking at something too faint for human ears. It lasted a second, no more, but it felt like the kind of moment you'd only recognize later. Then Ranger moved on, splashing lightly through the shallow water, and the city swallowed the sound. By the time they reached the precinct, the mist had turned to a chill that crept beneath Jake's uniform. He glanced down at the shepherd. Still no collar. Still no tags. But definitely not lost. Not in the way most strays were. This dog hadn't just wandered the streets by chance. He had belonged somewhere once, and whatever had torn him from that place had left marks deeper than the scar that ringed his neck. Jake kept thinking about that low growl at the sight of Dawson Tower, about Walter's words, about a shepherd who circled a building like a ghost on patrol, returning night after night as though chained to a memory. That wasn't random. Something inside that tower, or someone tied to it, was part of the dog's past. Inside the precinct, the yellow haze of street lamps gave way to the sterile wash of fluorescent light. Jake led the shepherd into a quiet corner by his desk and pulled an old blanket from a locker. The dog circled it once, curled into himself, yet never let his guard down. Even here, where the walls promised safety, his eyes flicked to the front door every time it opened, body taut as if expecting something to follow them in. Jake dropped heavily into his chair, water dripping from his jacket onto the scuffed linoleum. He pulled his phone out and scrolled through the precinct's incident logs for Dawson Tower. Nothing in weeks. Before that, a couple of trespassing calls, minor noise complaints. Then one report nearly 8 months back. A break-in at the loading dock. The call had been made by a security guard named Janet Miller. The name stirred something in Jake's memory, though the connection didn't surface just yet. He looked at the shepherd again. "We're going to figure this out, partner," he muttered. The dog's ears twitched at the word, and for the briefest moment, Jake could swear those amber eyes recognized it. By the time Jake closed the precinct's glass door behind them, the mist outside had thickened into drizzle, the kind that slithered under collars and soaked through fabric. The recycled warmth of the lobby wrapped around them weakly. Ranger shook once, spraying water across the linoleum, then stood watchful, scanning the room as though cataloging every sound. At the desk, Sergeant Linda Macaulay looked up from her paperwork. Short auburn hair shot through with silver framed a face carved by 20 years in uniform. Compact, no-nonsense, protective as steel. Jake knew she'd gone to bat for more than one officer in her time. Her eyes flicked from Jake to the dripping shepherd. "Stray or evidence?" she asked, voice rough with long shifts. "Something in between," Jake answered, tugging off his cap. "Found him out in the rain. I'll clean him up before anyone complains about the smell." Linda's mouth tugged into the faintest smirk, though her gaze softened on the dog. "Watch yourself, Turner. Strays have a way of sticking." Jake led Ranger down a side hall into the locker room, where a utility sink and an old hose passed for a wash station. Under harsh light, the shepherd's fur showed its neglect. Matted in patches, streaked with mud, dulled from weeks of weather. Jake filled a bucket with warm water, found a half-empty bottle of mild soap, and set to work. Ranger didn't flinch, didn't resist. He simply stood, eyes tracking every creak of a locker, every muffled laugh from the squad room, every ring of a phone. That restless vigilance wasn't the mark of a stray. Jake had seen it in combat veterans, in cops who carried too many bad calls home. "You've been somewhere rough, haven't you?" he murmured, rinsing the suds from the shepherd's coat. When he lifted the left ear to clean, he froze. There, faint beneath damp fur, was a tattoo. A small line of letters and numbers, etched with the kind of precision that spoke of paperwork and contracts. Jake's gut tightened. He knew the code. Registration markings for canine units used in private security and military outfits. Not a stray. Not by a long shot. "That explains a few things," he muttered, drying the dog with a worn towel. Ranger endured the process without complaint, shaking once when released, then standing still, amber eyes on Jake. Jake's eyes narrowed. If the system said the handler was dead and the dog was gone, then someone had made sure they both vanished on paper. Either the report was wrong, or someone had gone to great lengths to make sure this animal no longer existed. And if Janet was missing too, then Ranger wasn't just a stray, he was a survivor. Maybe the only one who knew the truth. Leaning back in his chair, Jake studied the dog. "You and I are going to have a long talk," he murmured. Ranger's ears twitched at the sound, but his gaze never left Jake. Outside, the rain softened to a faint patter against the glass, the city's heartbeat slowing into night. Inside, the precinct hummed with the low rhythm of paperwork and tired cops. Time slipped by as Jake alternated between files and the dog's watchful stare. Ranger didn't sleep, not in the real sense. His body was still, but his eyes shifted constantly, scanning, alert. Jake knew that look. He'd seen it in men who had lived through something they couldn't shake. A soldier still waiting for the next order. The cursor blinked on his screen, the word deceased, hanging like a lie in plain sight. His gut said it was wrong. He dug deeper, running Janet Miller's name through the NYPD archives. The system creaked along, spinning, stalling, as if even the machine was reluctant to hand over the truth. Finally, reports filled the screen. Most were routine corporate security logs, nothing unusual. But one, dated 8 months ago, stood out. Flagged priority, yet marked closed with no follow-up. Jake's pulse picked up. He opened it. Dawson Corporate Tower. The same building Ranger had reacted to earlier. The report detailed a disturbance. Unauthorized access on the executive floor. Filed by Janet Miller herself. Attached was her profile. Female, 32. Athletic build, dark hair pulled back, serious brown eyes that seemed to pierce even from the photo. The kind of face that spoke of discipline and strain. Her written account described overhearing senior executives and contractors discussing financial transfers that didn't align with corporate policy. Polite phrasing. Jake didn't need it spelled out, money laundering. But then, halfway through, the report ended. Mid-sentence. The rest of the pages were blank, stamped only with one chilling line. Handler unavailable for follow-up. Jake sat back, jaw tightening. He knew the pattern. He'd seen files cut short, trails erased, whenever they brushed against something powerful enough to bury them. The phone on his desk rang, slicing the silence. He grabbed it. "Turner." "Jake." "It's Samantha Ortiz from Records," came the voice. Young, sharp, quick-witted. A clerk who could remember case numbers better than most detectives. "You asked me for Dawson Tower security footage from that night? I found something." Jake straightened. "What is it?" "There's a gap," Samantha said. Executive floor cameras went dark for 32 minutes. But the loading dock was on a separate system. "There's a clip you need to see." A notification blinked on his screen. Jake opened the file. Grainy black and white footage filled the monitor. Timestamp, 11:43 p.m. The service elevator doors slid open. Ranger trotted into view, his coat thicker than, his movements urgent. Clamped between his teeth was a heavy canvas backpack. He paused at the edge of the dock, ears pricked, scanning the shadows, then slipped out of frame into the night. Jake felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just a stray with scars. Ranger had carried something out of that building. Evidence. Proof. A secret worth killing for. "You see anyone with him?" Jake asked, eyes fixed on the frozen frame. "No," Samantha said. But 15 minutes before that, Janet Miller swiped into the building with her card. She never swiped out. That was the last trace of her existence on record. Jake leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose as Samantha's voice echoed in his mind. The file didn't say she was missing, not officially. Officially, Janet Miller had resigned without notice. But both of them knew that was a lie dressed up as paperwork. He thanked Samantha and hung up, his gaze falling to Ranger curled up on a blanket beside the desk. The dog looked half asleep, though one amber eye stayed open, tracking his every move. Jake pulled up an evidence form on his screen, fingers hesitating as he started typing. Ariar's presence at Dawson Tower the night Janet vanished. The backpack. Janet's sudden involvement in a money laundering report. Her report disappearing as quickly as she did. But he didn't file it. Not yet. He knew too well what happened when cases like this hit the official system. They had a way of vanishing into thin air. For now, it would live in his private notes. He crouched down beside Ranger. That night, you saw something, didn't you? Maybe you even tried to protect her. The dog gave no answer, just a slow blink and a faint thump of his tail against the blanket. Still, the pieces were snapping together, too sharp to ignore. Janet had uncovered something dangerous, had filed evidence someone buried, and then she disappeared the same night her dog carried a mysterious backpack into the night. That wasn't coincidence. That was cause and effect. Linda McCauley passed by, slipping on her coat. Burning the midnight oil again? She teased. Something like that, Jake muttered. Her eyes flicked to Ranger. That one's been places. If only they could talk. Huh. Jake forced a smile. Yeah, if only. Outside, rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and shining beneath fractured city lights. Inside, Jake's pulse quickened. Ranger wasn't just some stray that wandered into his life. He was a breathing, living witness, a link to Janet Miller and a crime someone wanted buried so deep it would never see daylight. It was close to midnight when Jake gave up staring at the glow of his screen. The image haunted him. Grainy security footage of Ranger at the loading dock, carrying the heavy pack, moving with a strange sense of direction before disappearing into the shadows. It wasn't random. The dog knew where he was going. Jake looked over at Ranger, whose eyes stayed locked on him even as his body lay relaxed. All right, partner, Jake whispered. Let's see where you went that night. He tied a rope into a makeshift leash and pushed open the precinct's side door. Cold night air rushed in. The streets were almost silent. A delivery truck rumbled in the distance. A faint siren wailed blocks away. Ranger transformed instantly, his posture sharpening, nose inches from the ground, every muscle tense with purpose. Jake followed as the dog traced an invisible path through narrow blocks, past closed shops, toward the riverfront where the air grew heavy and damp. They stopped at a construction site. The chain-link fence was bent just enough for a determined animal to slip through. Ranger darted inside. Jake followed, boots crunching over gravel as they wound through stacks of concrete forms and rusting scaffolding. At the far end, tucked behind fallen sheets of metal, a shadowed opening gaped. Jake crouched and shined his flashlight inside. A service tunnel, walls lined with slick old brick. Ranger didn't wait. He padded inside, silent as a ghost. Jake ducked in behind him, the smell of mold and rust filling his lungs. The tunnel stretched, then widened into a low chamber. Ranger stopped at a stack of wooden crates pressed against the wall, pawing furiously. Jake shoved one aside. Hidden in a recess of crumbling brick was a weathered canvas backpack, strapped stiff with mud. He dragged it out and unzipped it. Inside was a notebook, wrapped in plastic. He opened it, eyes scanning the blocky handwriting. Dates, times, meetings, offshore accounts, shell companies in Nevada, threats to silence leaks, and one name written again and again, Hale. Victoria Hale, COO of Dawson Towers' parent company. This wasn't petty crime. This was organized corruption. Dangerous, deadly. A faint noise stopped him cold. A scrape against stone deeper in the tunnel. Ranger stiffened, ears high. A low growl rumbling from his chest that made Jake's skin prickle. He snapped off his flashlight. The sound came again, soft but deliberate. They froze, waited. The silence stretched, broken only by the echo of dripping water. Finally, the noise faded. Ranger stayed rigid, eyes locked on the darkness, growl tapering to silence. Jake exhaled slowly, zipped the pack shut, and swung it onto his shoulder. His voice was low, steady. Let's get this to the car. The tunnel seemed shorter on the way back, though Jake felt every second drag in his bones. Ranger's eyes kept flicking behind them, alert, like he expected the darkness to spit something out in pursuit. When they finally stepped back into the construction site, the cold night air felt like surfacing from underwater. Jake paused, scanning every corner before slipping onto the street. By the time they reached the precinct, his clothes clung with grime and dampness, and the backpack on his shoulders felt heavier than paper had any right to be. He set it on his desk like it carried the weight of someone's life and crouched beside Ranger, resting a hand on his head. "You've been protecting this the whole time, haven't you? Making sure it stayed out of the wrong hands." The dog's tail gave a single steady thump against the floor, eyes calm and watchful. Jake knew in that moment. This was the first real step toward finding Janet Miller, the first crack in the wall Victoria Hale had built around herself. The next morning, the conference room on the third floor felt more like an interrogation chamber than a meeting space. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a cooling coffee sat untouched in front of Jake, and the battered canvas backpack lay on the table like a silent witness. Across from him sat Marcus Hale, no relation to Victoria, special agent with the FBI's New York field office. Tall, wiry, in his early 40s, with a clean-shaven head and sharp eyes that seemed to cut through noise and hesitation alike. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man used to danger, used to walking into chaos with a plan already written. Jake slid the notebook across the table, careful not to brush the pages with his gloved hands. Every page is Janet's. Dates, meetings, payments, threats. It's enough to bury her, if we can tie it all together. Marcus flipped through slowly, his expression tightening with each page. "We've heard whispers about Victoria for years, but this..." He tapped the notebook, his gloved finger pressing against the paper as though anchoring its truth. "This could change everything." The door opened. Agent Dana Collier entered, arms full. A laptop, a stack of manila folders, energy spilling into the room before her words did. Mid-30s, wiry strength in her frame, auburn curls pulled back loosely. Her presence carried the persistence of someone who had spent years dragging missing people back from the void. She set her laptop down, flipping it open with brisk precision. "We cross-referenced the dates in Janet's notes with our surveillance logs. At least 4 of the meetings line up with sightings of known players in the city. Guys connected to Eastern European syndicates." Her eyes flicked to the dog under the table. "And that's Ranger, the one from the video." Jake nodded. He was Janet's partner, guarded that notebook for 8 months. Dana crouched, extending a hand. Ranger sniffed once, gave a soft wag. She smiled faintly. "Good instincts." For the next hour, the room filled with strategy. The FBI would chase the money trails, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the threads leading to Victoria's empire. Jake would stay on the ground, shadowing her movements, waiting for the moment she slipped, the moment they could lock her to the crimes in black and white. By midday, Jake and Ranger were back on the streets. The October air carried a sharp bite, leaves scraping across the pavement. Ranger's steps were steady, but his ears flicked constantly, his head turning back more often than usual. 3 times Jake noticed a black SUV trailing their turns. The 3rd time, Ranger growled low in his throat. Jake cut across traffic, ducking into an alley to test it. The SUV rolled past without slowing, but Ranger didn't relax until it vanished. Jake scratched his ears, murmuring, "You don't miss a thing, do you?" Later, at the department's K-9 training yard, the dog's sharpness was put to use. Jake called it exercise, but both of them knew it was more than that. A handful of off-duty officers were there, including Ben Ramirez, a broad-shouldered cop with a laugh that seemed to shake the ground. His little girl, Sophia, was with him. 6 years old, pigtails bouncing against a pink hoodie, holding a bright red ball like treasure. She wandered toward Ranger. The dog's whole posture shifted, softening, tail wagging slow and gentle. When she tossed the ball clumsily, he retrieved it carefully, placing it back in her small hands like he understood fragility. Ben chuckled. "Guess he's got a soft spot for kids. Or maybe," Jake said quietly, watching the dog's watchful gaze, "he just knows who the good ones are." A sudden clang from the far side of the yard made Ranger stiffen instantly, stepping between Sophia and the sound before he realized it was just a gate. Only when he was sure the danger was nothing did he ease back, letting the girl resume her game. By dusk, Jake sat in his unmarked car, eyes fixed on Dawson Tower, the heart of Victoria's empire. He and Marcus had agreed this would be his post. Close enough to observe, far enough to avoid spooking her. Ranger lay in the back seat, nose pressed near the open crack of the window, every sound outside filtering through his instincts. Twice he barked sharp warnings at passersby who lingered too long near the side entrance. And Jake knew the walls around Victoria Hale were beginning to tremble. Do you want me to keep expanding each scene with deeper atmospheric detail, like describing the precinct, tension and dialogue, Ranger's instinctive behaviors, so the rewritten script not only stays the same length but grows even richer? Or do you prefer I keep it exactly equal in length and pacing to your original? Jake felt the shift in the air before anyone moved. Victoria's protest hung brittle and hollow, the kind of voice that once commanded rooms but now cracked under the weight of truth. Ranger's bark still echoed in the glass walls, a raw reminder that there were things no polished speech could bury. The FBI agents closed in, their steps steady, rehearsed. Victoria's heels clicked backward, colliding with the edge of the table. Her hand trembled as if she might cling to it, but the mahogany surface offered no anchor. For the first time, the board saw her without the armor of power, just a cornered figure, trapped between law and consequence. Ranger's growl rumbled low, primal, carrying the memory of Janet Miller in every vibration. Jake didn't move to hold him back. He didn't need to. Ranger wasn't lashing out. He was bearing witness. The dog's amber eyes locked on Victoria's, and in them she seemed to see not just fur and fangs, but the shadow of the woman she tried to erase. One of the agents read her rights with calm precision, while the other slipped the cuffs around her wrists. The metallic snap cut sharper than her pearls ever gleamed. Victoria's defiance flickered, then dimmed entirely, her shoulders slumping as though centuries of secrets had finally grown too heavy to hold. The boardroom was silent, every executive fixed in uneasy stillness. Some stared at the floor, others at the skyline beyond the glass. None dared speak. The empire Victoria built was crumbling, and no one wanted to be crushed beneath its fall. Jake rose slowly, his hand brushing Ranger's head in quiet thanks. The dog's ears twitched, but his gaze never wavered from Victoria as she was escorted out. The once untouchable queen of Dawson Tower shuffled past her peers, every step echoing with finality. When the doors closed behind her, Jake exhaled, the tension leaving his chest in a rush. Marcus glanced at him, then at Ranger, nodding once. A silent acknowledgement of the strange, unwavering bond that had cracked open a case no one thought solvable. Ranger settled at Jake's feet, steady as stone, his presence filling the room with something larger than justice. It wasn't just about evidence or arrests anymore. It was about loyalty, about truth carried forward on four legs when humans had failed. Jake bent slightly, his voice low, meant only for the dog. "We got her, partner." Ranger gave one last deep breath, almost a sigh, before lowering his head to the polished floor. And in that stillness, Jake knew this wasn't the end of the hunt. It was only the first chapter in a story where a dog held the memory of the lost, and a detective carried the weight of the living. Handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The agents led her toward the door, her heels striking the polished floor with sharp, defiant beats that echoed through the room. Jake watched her go, feeling no triumph, no satisfaction, only the heavy sense that a long, delayed balance had finally begun to right itself. Justice was never about victory, it was about restoration. Marcus turned to the board members, his voice firm but steady. "We'll need your cooperation moving forward. This investigation doesn't end here." As the FBI gathered the evidence, Ranger settled back at Jake's side, tail thumping once against the carpet as if to mark the moment. Quiet, but certain. The first time Jake saw Janet Miller again, she was in a recovery ward at Bellevue Hospital, a pale shaft of winter sunlight spilling across her bed. She looked smaller than she had in her security badge photo, her frame thinned from months of deprivation. But her eyes, deep brown, clear, alert, had lost none of their fire. Her dark hair was cropped short now, uneven at the edges, with faint lines of strain pulling at her mouth. Ranger was the first to move. The moment Jake opened the door, the German shepherd padded forward, nails clicking softly against the linoleum. Janet's head snapped up, disbelief flooding her face. "Ranger," Her voice cracked on the second syllable. The dog closed the distance in 3 long strides, pressing his head into her lap with a low, trembling whine Jake had never heard from him before. Janet buried her fingers in his fur, tears spilling freely as she murmured his name again and again, as though afraid he might vanish if she stopped. Jake stayed near the door, giving them the space they deserved. When at last she looked up at him, her voice was steadier. "They told me you found him." "He found me," Jake said simply, "and he led me to the proof we needed." Over the next week, Janet's strength began to return. The FBI kept agents posted outside her room, and Dana Collier visited daily to update her on the case against Victoria Hale. Janet told them about the night she vanished, how she'd hidden the notebook in Ranger's backpack when she realized her life was in danger, trusting him to get it out, trusting that somehow the truth would find its way. One afternoon, as Jake prepared to leave, Janet rested her hand on Ranger's back. "He's yours now," she said softly. "I can't take him away from the person he chose. Besides," her smile was faint but genuine, "he clearly works better with you." Jake felt an unexpected lump rise in his throat. "I'll take care of him. Always." A month later, on a clear February morning, Jake signed the paperwork making Ranger an official member of the NYPD K-9 unit. The department vet estimated him at 6 years old, seasoned, but still in his prime. He was issued a custom vest with K-9 Ranger stitched across the side, though Jake still preferred him in his sturdy leather collar when they were off duty. Life settled into a new rhythm. Ranger slept beside Jake's bed every night, his steady breathing a quiet reassurance in the dark. In the mornings, they trained together at the department's canine yard, Ranger's discipline sharpening with every drill. His tracking skills proved invaluable in active cases. Twice in the first month, he located missing persons within hours, proof of his remarkable instincts. But it wasn't just about work. On Jake's days off, Ranger joined him for long walks through the neighborhood. Children from the nearby apartments would race over when they saw them, and Ranger's demeanor shifted instantly. Tail wagging, posture soft, eyes warm. He let small hands pat his head, tug gently at his ears, and bury their faces in his thick fur. There was something healing in the way he moved through those moments. A creature who had seen the worst of humanity, still choosing to trust. One of those afternoons, Jake spotted Walter Briggs, the homeless veteran from months before, leaning against a lamp post. He wore a new jacket, his posture straighter, his eyes clearer. Jake soon learned Walter had been connected with a veterans outreach program, thanks in part to the information Jake had passed along. Walter's grin was wide as he bent to scratch Ranger's chin. "Told you he was a smart one." That night, back at home, Jake sat on the couch with Ranger stretched out at his feet. His mind drifted through the months past. The rain-soaked night they met, the dark tunnel, the tense boardroom, and Janet's tears in that hospital room. The job had a way of wearing down a man's belief in what he was doing. But Ranger had given him something back. Proof that persistence mattered, that loyalty could survive anything. Before turning in, Jake glanced down. "Come on, partner. Bedtime." Ranger rose and followed, leaping lightly onto his blanket at the foot of the bed. Jake switched off the light, and the city's hum softened into a distant lull. Somewhere outside, the world was still full of trouble. But here, in this small space, there was safety, purpose, and the quiet bond between a man and the dog who had chosen him. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. They come quietly, in the shape of a loyal friend, a second chance, or the courage to keep going when the road feels too long. Jake thought he was saving a stray dog, but in truth, God had sent Ranger to save him, to restore his faith, to guide him to justice, and to remind him that love and loyalty are divine gifts. In our daily lives, we may overlook these small miracles. A kind word, a helping hand, a moment of protection we never expected. But every act of goodness is a thread in God's greater plan, weaving us closer to the people and the purpose He has chosen for us. If this story touched your heart, share it with others so they too can see how God works in mysterious and beautiful ways. Leave a comment with amen if you believe God can use even the smallest moments to change a life. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe so more people can hear stories of hope, love, and faith. May God bless you and protect you always. Amen.